Welcome back, everybody, to Don't Look Up, where we ask you to look up, a space for real conversations about health powered by your curiosity and founded in science. Today, Dr. Ted, we are talking about nicotine. Ooh, are you scared?
No, I love nicotine.
You're probably one of the OGs when it comes to using nicotine
Yeah.
for cognitive enhancement, right? And so today we're going to talk about, yes, nicotine can be addictive. Vaping, smoking, probably not a great idea, but from a cognitive performance perspective, if you're not using it, you're probably handicapping yourself.
And from a pharmacological point of view, it delivers what it's supposed to do.
And Dr. Ted, the question is, how are you taking your nicotine? Are you vaping it, smoking it? Are you using a transdermal patch? Are you using a gum? What are you using?
A buccal troche.
That's it. Let's get to it. So nicotine, we're going to talk about it. We're going to get down deep in the science, and it's been around a long time. We know about it since Native Americans, and using tobacco has been something that's been used ceremonially for many, many thousands of years. What we're going to talk about, though, is actually the nicotine molecule itself. So not in other compounds like vaping products, cigarettes, but we're going to touch on that. And hint, the reason why they're more addicting is because there are other products in those, not just nicotine.
Right.
And then we're also going to talk about how nicotine actually works on the cellular level as a neurotransmitter activator, and specifically the nicotinyl acetylcholine receptor. And so as we get through some questions here, we're going to talk about all these beautiful neurotransmitters. All right, first question from our good friend, Renee. Any thoughts on how long before bed to avoid nicotine?
Nicotine is a stimulant.
Yes.
So I would avoid it. At the same time, I would avoid coffee at around 2 p.m. If I'm targeting a bedtime of around 11 p.m.
Isn't it also true, though, Dr. Ted, that nicotine has a shorter half-life than caffeine typically?
Yeah, it does.
But so even still, right? Because some people can be more sensitive to the nicotine.
Not only that, because it's also, as we will discuss later, it will also boost your dopamine and norepinephrine, increasing your wakefulness, and then you won't be able to sleep at night again.
Right. So even if it's a short-term 2-hour half-life, you're still going to get additional norepinephrine and dopamine that's going to kind of keep you going through.
You're going to, again, disrupt your sleep drive.
So around 2 o'clock is probably the best time to stop having nicotine. Now, in a pinch, I've done this before. I know you have. If you have like a late podcast or a late meeting or presentation and you are willing to take a little bit of a chance and you've kind of played around with it a little bit before.
Yes.
You've used it before for podcasts.
Yeah,
right?
and dosing actually came from my formulation of a product, right? And that's how I actually found that I am a lightweight when it comes to nicotine. Like 0.25 milligrams is already good enough for me. 0.5 is going to give me diarrhea. So I already know all of those things. So you guys can experiment with what actually is good for you.
And I think this is a good place to kind of talk about and add about the dosing of nicotine in various products. Okay. So what's the average amount of nicotine in a nicotine replacement?
It's a 4 milligram gum, but you could see that 2 milligrams now rapidly disappearing because you can just cut the gum.
Yeah.
Right. However, some of the gums are actually have a sugar coating around them, which like, okay, you're trying to quit cigarette smoking, but now you're going to get diabetes.
And that actually happens not that infrequently when people stop smoking because nicotine and as a stimulant, it's anorexant, right? So it's going to help people decrease their appetite. This is why it's so common when you used to go around model shows in New York, right?
Yeah. I used to get invited to these runways and people would be smoking like crazy. And, I was having a conversation with Boomer, in fact, yesterday. And after a while, you think you don't like your suit to actually smell like cigarette smoke.
It's nasty.
But after a while, it's like, okay, everyone's, clothes smell the same way. So you do it. However, as you pointed out, it's actually what's mixed with it, right?
Right.
Especially the natural forms of nicotine. Of course, we formulate with synthetic form of nicotine, but the natural forms of nicotine are combusted together with all of these other parts of the plant that actually are not friendly to your lungs.
And also with these are the additives, right? These are the things. And what has happened over many thousands of years is that we've bred tobacco containing leaves to actually have more addictive potential, more nicotine, true, but also more of the additives as well. And we know from various studies, and I remember this is the first study you actually showed me on nicotine, because I was like, nicotine, really, Ted? We're gonna actually formulate with nicotine? In 2019, you're like, read this. And it was a study about how much more addictive cigarettes are and vaping products specifically because of those added products in there.
You know, I've always wondered why we haven't explored this nootropic. And I found this old article in Scientific American that's actually said exactly what I was thinking. It's like, nicotine, could this be the forgotten nootropic?
Yeah.
And I studied the pharmacology of it and so on and so forth. It's like, very small doses of this should be very good for basically titrating your attention, your concentration, your focus, especially if you need small bursts of focus.
Yeah.
It's really very, very useful.
Yeah. And now it's becoming a lot more popular, but of course you were a trendsetter as usual. When it comes to other types of products, we talked about gums, we talked about obviously vaping and smoking. Then there's also patches. What other kind? And there's also, I think that's pretty much it, right? Then the patches are the other major one.
Yeah. Have you ever seen anyone doing IV?
No IV nicotine. No.
For those of you who formulate, nicotine comes as a liquid. Yeah. Right. And it's very viscous. It's very hard to measure it. So one time, I was measuring it and I forgot to wipe off the nicotine liquid that's stuck to the side of my syringe. And when I tested the product, it's like, whoa, this is like, 15 times more than I intended to be. But those are actually safer because when I formulate, I actually like that I know, as a physician especially, and someone trained in pharmacology, right, that exactly how many milligrams of nicotine is going to my patients and to my clients when I recommend it to them.
Right, and that's a really good point. And maybe the final one about Renee's question, although we've kind of got off a little bit here, is how much nicotine is in a product like ours, which is formulated specifically with a certain amount of nicotine versus a cigarette, which can have a huge range. It can have anywhere between 10 and 20 milligrams typically. And cigars actually have 100 milligrams of nicotine in them.
Yeah, it has 1 milligram.
Yeah.
And it's actually quite funny because I was talking to someone before and said, wow, your product has nicotine. And I said, you can go to a drugstore and buy 200 pieces of gum that has 4 milligrams of nicotine each, and you don't get any question. I said, and you're questioning this product that has 1 milligram of nicotine.
It's crazy. It's crazy. And I think that's the beauty of how you typically formulate. And for those that are interested, actually, that are listening, we have a great behind the scenes video that's going to be coming out soon on Dr. Ted's special laboratory setup and the back stories, because that's how we start everything. We start everything in your lab, right? And when you're talking about using nicotine, you really are. You're down, using all the ingredients, trying to formulate, and sometimes things go a little pear-shaped, right? That's the nature.
Yeah, I suffer or I get high.
And you're patient 0, and then patient 1 is usually boomer. So. Next question. What about chewing Tabasco or the pouches people put in their lips? I think this lady means chewing tobacco. My sense with this question is that it's very similar to your cigarettes and to your vaping products. Chewing tobacco is not just tobacco. It's all these other things that are in the plant as well. And actually much higher doses of nicotine compared to obviously products like ours, but similar, I think, to cigarettes, but maybe even higher at times as well.
What do you call this? Like snus, right?
Snus is one, and then there's all different types. There's companies out there that are making pure nicotine pouches as well, but usually they're much higher in the dose.
Yeah.
Usually the dose is at least 5 milligrams, if not 10 or 20.
That's so American. If it's good, then some more.
Go baby down, yeah.
Aside from the effects we'll discuss later, the way that it actually raises your dopamine, can get to those levels where you actually are looking now for the high that comes from it, rather than as an aid, a nootropic aid to what you're trying to do.
Right, and that's why it's so important to stay below a certain amount of milligrams per day, which we'll get to in a minute. In the respect of this lady's question regarding chewing Tabasco, we don't recommend doing that. Please don't chew Tabasco. That's going to be very spicy. But chewing tobacco, still, it's very much associated with things like tongue cancers, mouth cancers, high doses of nicotine typically. So I would say definitely no.
And I hope people who do this visit a dentist, and they usually not.
Next question. So I think this is referring to Blue Cannatine, our product at Troscriptions. So is this for people who want to quit smoking or vaping?
No, there are products that are specifically designated for those. They usually have a higher nicotine content. Ours is for the lifting of brain fog and the optimization of focus.
Exactly. Yeah. So we only have 1 milligram of nicotine in a full troche in Blue Cannatine. Minimum replacement's about 2 milligrams typically, right? So this is typically going to be too low of a dose.
Yeah, and you can even cut it, right?
Yes, of course, right. And you can do a quarter, which is your 0.25 milligrams
0.25
of nicotine. Yeah. So it's important for people to know this is not a direct smoke. If you're smoking a lot already, Blue Cannatine is probably not going to be enough nicotine for you, but it's going to have other things in there that might actually help you feel more focused and more productive along the way of getting off it. So this is the next question. I use 1/8 of a patch every day. less than 3 milligrams for ADHD, and it helps tremendously. Have you heard of this before?
Yeah, some people, don't do this yourself. You're going to do it, enlist the help of someone to actually help you transition to something that is non-addicting.
I think there's 3 strength patches out there right now. Don't quote me. I think it's 8, 16, and 25 or something like that. But in any respect, you can cut the patches and use smaller amounts. It's a little bit harder to do, but I know people do it. And if they're looking for a small amount to go a long way, having a transdermal variety is not a bad idea.
I didn't know that transdermal had a very high absorption rate.
They do have very high absorption, but it's a slower absorption over the day versus nicotine.
Maybe it's what I need.
Yeah, let's give it a try. I know several practitioners that use them when they're working in their offices. They have long days, they stick a patch on their arm, and they feel like they can much more lock in, keep their focus. And that's that nicotine throughout the day, right?
Yeah, before I formulated a product, patient actually saw that I had nicotine lozenge on my table and said, "Dr. Ted, you smoke?" I said, "No, I actually use it for," "You what?"
Use it for cognitive enhancement. Just to wrap up on those questions, everybody, we talked about how long you should think about using nicotine before bed. As Dr. Ted mentioned, even though the half-life is around 2 hours, you want to stop about 2 p.m. because of the dopamine and norepinephrine in there. We talked about chewing tobacco. Please don't chew chewing tobacco, but chewing tobacco we don't recommend. Obviously, they're too high of a dose of nicotine, other additives that can also be more addictive, and they're associated with tongue and lip cancers. So the next question was around, is Blue Cannatine specifically a product to help you quit smoking? The answer is no, because the dose is low, but it still may help with some of the cognitive side. And then using 1/8 of a patch every day, we see a lot more people doing this for many, many different things, for cognitive enhancement, I've seen people with chronic autoimmune and inflammatory disorders as well, using the patches.
Yeah, because it's an anti-inflammatory.
Yeah, which we're going to get to soon. So the key with nicotine is dosing. Let's dig into why this is so important. But first, let's talk about what nicotine is actually doing in our neurotransmitters, or what is happening to our neurotransmitters because we're taking nicotine. So Dr. Chad, you want to take this away?
Yeah, nicotine is actually a very small molecule. It's lipophilic, meaning it's fat loving. So it can actually cross the brain very, very quickly. And it binds to receptors as called NCARs, or N-acetylcholine receptors. And so by the name N-acetylcholine, so it essentially binds to choline receptors, and we know that these are responsible for a short-term memory.
Right.
At the same time, when it does that, the other effect that it does is actually it releases glutamate, which is an excitatory neuron. It provides a necessary excitation, for neuronal function. And then what is interesting about it is that it affects certain dopaminergic neurons in an area of the brain called the phoebe. You can force those neurons to release dopamine and more epinephrine.
Right. And this happens very, very quickly too. So you have dopamine, glutamate, acetylcholine, norepinephrine, serotonin, and it also prevents GABA from doing its thing, right? And GABA, as you and I very well know, is the brakes of the brain. And so the brakes of the brain calm the brain down. What nicotine does is prevent GABA from working as well. And this actually could be a challenge over the long term, right? Because you're going to get GABA insensitivity as well with any stimulant over the long term, but nicotine as well.
Yeah, someone close to you doesn't excite me anymore.
You need to see more of them, or you need to not see them for a long time and then see them again and get excited again. Next question, which was really a comment. Before I got pregnant, I occasionally had a nicotine gum, and I swear I felt like a superhero when teaching. I'm currently still nursing my son, so waiting to stop before I try incorporating it again in other supplements. Thanks for sharing this. Ted, I think one thing we should say about this is that no matter what dose of nicotine you're taking, it's really unsafe in pregnancy and also in breastfeeding.
We say this is synthetic nicotine that we're talking about, right? But remember that some of your foods may actually contain natural nicotine, right? So for all of this hype about your pregnancy and no nicotine and this and that, check the foods that you're eating. You may be surprised about how much nicotine they contain. And the other thing that I'd like to remind you is that vitamin D3 is called nicotinic acid, right? And we're talking about nicotine. You put the 2 and 2 together.
They're not the same thing. Okay, but there are some corollaries there, right? Okay, next question. I believe there are studies that say it's not good for osteoporosis, no matter what form of nicotine. I guess we all have to pick our battles with the sad face. So, this is a great question. And really it's related to the research on smoking and vaping specifically. And the thing about smoking, it has all these other compounds in there. We talked about these. Some are called polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbon. You have these other aspects of really high dose of cigarette smoking that are also affecting the bone as well.
Yeah, in fact, the initial reports on Jewel, remember? It was not actually from nicotine, but from the oils that they put in there were actually being vaporized and actually causing, the damage to the lungs.
That was a specific type of lung disorder, right? These kids are coming in at 17, 18 years old with these terrible looking lungs. I remember being in the hospital and seeing a couple of patients.
For me, it's like, it was kind of surprising for me that they would attribute this to nicotine. For something like that, nicotine is a very well-established molecule, right? Yeah. Look for other things that these people are putting in. And of course, these oils will actually burn at a high temperature and release, what they will release and damage.
And what are they using the oils for? Typically, it's going to be for taste and for smell. Low doses of nicotine are actually quite safe. 1 to 2 milligrams, probably up to 4 or 5 milligrams. Really, there's really no studies out there showing any detrimental effect on bone itself. In fact, there are some studies showing that these lower doses might have significant increase in the response to what are called the osteoblastic cells, the cells that make bone, and downregulate the cells called osteoclasts that decrease the amount of bone that we have and break it down. So I think the key here is, again, you always talk about this, right? It's a dose response issue. And it's also a delivery issue too, right?
Yeah. Well, talking about bone, I had a patient who actually had very great bones, was smoking. The reason for that was that she was smoking sleeveless in the noonday sun. She was getting a lot of vitamin D, getting a lot of her calcium to her bones. She has a fantastic bone.
She was just compensating very well. Yeah, and the other thing about cigarette smoking with all those other additives, along with the higher doses of nicotine, is that it causes chronic inflammation. Yeah. And if you have chronic inflammation in the system, you're not going to be able to make bone. You can't make red blood cells. A lot of things you can't do with inflammation. So
it's how our cells respond to any stressor, physical, chemical, psychological, emotional. It will actually cause a molecular inflammation.
All right, next question. Assuming this is all true, it seems you would need to decide what's more important, you, heart health, or brain health. Well, again, this is a devil in the details again, right, Dr. Ted?
I think it's more like, why do you consider the organs as one more important than the other? You cannot survive without a heart, nor can you survive without a brain, right? So no, it's the overall health that you want to consider every time. Right? Because these organs, in illness medicine, these organs are actually networked also, right? You don't give priority to one or the other. That's why in our nonprofit, we focus on the cell, which is contained in all the organs, and can actually take a look at what they need.
Exactly. And then that's actually, I knew exactly where you're going to go there, was all of those organs are made up of cells. And all of those cells have the same ecosystem ongoing that will affect many different things, not only in that particular tissue, but in other cells as well, because of how the body works. It's not like you just have an organ and your organ works in a silo.
And people tend to focus on the brain or the heart, Yeah. Kidneys are important. Your livers are important. So just isolating one over the other.
Yeah, and there's no doubt about it that an instant hit of nicotine from a cigarette, a vaping product, or like a high dose oral product as well is going to very quickly raise your blood pressure. There's no doubt about that. And because it is a stimulant. But lower doses, slower acting or slower release don't have that same effects.
Well, if your daughter comes home at midnight and she's 14, that will also instantly raise your blood pressure. So what's the difference, right?
It's all relative. Risk benefit, organ, cell. I see where we're going here. Cool. Next question by Bill Hanks. So 1 to 4 milligrams per day seems a bit low. What about high blood pressure and years of use? Any thoughts? Well, I think this question's just what we talked about before, right? It's got much more to do about high doses of nicotine and then usually vaping or smoking, right?
Yeah, it's, when you're talking about nicotine as a pure molecule, then that it's out of your system within the day. But when you're talking about all of these other additives in it, then that accounts for a lot more damage and a lot more inflammation than can be accounted with nicotine.
Yeah, I think this is a good place to talk about the addictive potential of nicotine on its own. And so some of the studies have shown that if you're using more than 5 milligrams per day, that's when you start having a risk of getting addicted. But lower than that, especially slower acting formulas, troches, gums, etc., the risk of addiction is extremely low. On average, what we've found is that 0.5 milligrams of nicotine, especially if you're combining it with other things like we are, a little bit of caffeine, CBD, and some methylene blue, that's all most people need, right? Yeah. Cool. Next question. Nicotine has really helped me with my ADHD. That messed up my life. But the problem is I've had a little bit of a early gum recession / gum inflammation from it. Is there any way to increase blood flow to the gums in spite of using it?
shift away from a chewable dosage factor into like transdermal and so on, so you won't have this.
Or potentially a troche as well, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the gums, what I would recommend in somebody like this is changing up their delivery, as you just said. It's also important to change it in the location, because typically the way you use nicotine is you chew it a little bit and then you place it someplace and then you chew it a little bit more, the gum specifically. And so if you're putting the same place every time, you don't want to do that. But nicotine does have a mild vasoconstrictive effect. So you could see this potentially happening. And I also have a question of how much he was actually using in this one, right? So if he was using just a little bit of nicotine, probably not a problem. But if he's using 20 or 30 or 40 milligrams per day, which is...
Look, it's for ADHD. It's probably a high dose.
Yeah. So I have patients that have come to me on huge amounts of nicotine, both vaping and in the pouches as well. And the cool thing about nicotine withdrawal is it's not that long. Have you seen it before?
Yeah, I have. Yeah. Of course, the longer you smoke.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Then the more difficult it is.
Right.
But if you're using pure nicotine, I know some people are addicted to the sprays and stuff. It's actually very easy to take them out of their addiction.
Usually the actual physical addiction part of it is done within about 48 to 72 hours, I think, right? But obviously the actual cognitive, typically, and you and I have seen people like this, right? They start off with one spray a couple times a day, then it's one spray every 3 hours, then one spray every hour, then 5 sprays every hour. Like the thing about nicotine as a spray specifically is it can hit the system faster than a troche or a gum even. So you do have to be aware of that, especially when you're looking at sprays. All right, next question. This is from a doc. Her question, or maybe this is more of a comment, works great for long haul COVID too. I use very little for my ADHD patients, as that's often related to acetylcholine deficiency, and love it. But as a warning, disclose it will increase your disability insurance, as insurance companies equate gums or patches to cigarette smoking, even though it's not the same. This is actually a really big point, right? And we found this out the hard way when we started the company in 2020, is that if you're getting a life insurance physical, do not use nicotine for at least a week before. The nice thing about nicotine, as we mentioned, is it's the half-life is short, but just to give yourself, just to be sure about it, because if you get nicotine tested, which you will in a life insurance physical, they're not going to give you life insurance, or they're going to increase your rates as well, right?
For me, especially in the products that you have, nicotine has such a short half-life and such a low dose. It really shouldn't matter whether or not you have the system the same day or not with the doses that you're using. But, these are the regulations that we have right now.
Yeah. And the other part of this, I think, is great that she was sharing that she's had some really good success using nicotine for what's called long haul COVID. And this is something that I've seen in the integrative world for the last, I think, about 3 or 4 years now. And there was that initial couple studies, and you and I know about this, where smokers actually we thought would be sicker with COVID, right? Because they smoke and their lungs are not as optimized, but they actually did better than we thought. And the thought was that nicotine actually prevented the COVID virus from binding to a certain receptor in the lungs. But now you don't see as much acute COVID anymore. We're seeing a lot more long COVID. And we're seeing that a lot of other practitioners are starting to use low doses of nicotine. Often the patch is what I've seen, but also the gums and also Blue Cannatine at times. Do you remember the one story we had of that one lady that came to the booth? So this is a lady that had lost her smell.
Oh, yeah.
This lady that lost her smell from COVID maybe a couple of years before, and she was having a tough time, I remember. And she just took a quarter of our Blue Cannatine. And as she was dissolving the quarter, I remember she was just so upset.
Yeah.
She started to get the chills. She started feeling like she was kind of detoxing.
Yeah.
She had this acute presentation while she had it in her mouth. But the next day, she comes back and she has her smell back. And she hadn't been able to smell in like 2 years.
And she specifically came back to the booth.
Yes.
Tell her that she had her smell back.
Yeah, it was amazing. And so that's one of many stories that we've heard over the years. And again, we're not recommending if you have long COVID, you take a nicotine patch, work with your providers to make sure it's safe. And typically it is, but it's really important to have somebody in conjunction to work with. Long COVID is a complicated, multifaceted, multisystemic issue, right? And so some of the reasons why we think nicotine might be helpful in COVID, right? We know that it can actually modulate what's called the cholinergic anti-inflammatory pathway, which is how we can downregulate inflammation and inflammatory cytokines like TNF alpha, interleukin beta, 1 beta, and IL-6. And so those are all pro-inflammatory. And if you have those floating around, that is just associated with autoimmunity in general.
Please, if you have sore throat, please stop smoking.
Yes. Oh, so if you're coming down with a sore throat, you need...
Yeah. Oh, it's going to dampen my inflammation of my throat.
Why do you think you have a sore throat in the first place, right? So nicotine's also been shown as a profound anti-inflammatory, especially in the brain.
Yes.
And working on those same receptors, balancing autonomic function, so your sympathetic and your parasympathetic nervous system. You wouldn't think that, but these lower doses actually have more of a parasympathetic angle to them than the higher doses, which are going to cause more of a sympathetic.
Yeah, because cholinergic systems, right, are generally rest and digest type of systems, right? In facilitating working memory, etc. Those these are your primary effects would be parasympathetic, and then as you increase that, then you start targeting the neurons that are going to actually produce dopamine or epinephrine, etc. But as you could see, all the major neurotransmitters are actually affected, right?
Yeah, all of them.
Glutamate, GABA, serotonin, and so on. So you could see that, and so when I saw it, it's like, what's not to love? And it's like, well, apparently the government doesn't allow it. So.
Yes, there's that. Yeah. One other good interesting piece here that is the microglia in the brain. Do you want to discuss what the microglia are briefly?
Yeah, Scott is younger than I am, but when we were taught the microglia were simply support systems in the brain, or just
that's all. I thought I learned in medical school too. That's all.
Supporting the system. Yeah. Now we know that these are actually astrocytes.
Right.
That the new neurons actually come from them. They actually serve as the immune system.
Right, the immune system part
of the brain.
Yeah.
So that thing has already that cell that we just supporting system of the brain is no longer supporting.
It's so classic human, right? Like, we don't know what that is, so it doesn't do anything.
It actually produces the ketone, the alternative fuel of the brain.
Oh, it does? Yeah, you know that. Okay,
yeah,
cool. Yeah, and so there's some evidence that nicotine actually can reduce microglial activation, which is, like you said, it's the brain's immune system. And if you can downregulate the brain's immune system being overactive, people are going to feel better, right? And that's the big thing there. And then, finally, there is some evidence that some long COVID patients, you have what are called autoantibodies. Basically, you have this sort of autoimmune symptom or syndrome that can be similar to something like your lupus or your Sjogren's disease and things like that. And there's some evidence that low doses of nicotine, these really low doses, can help rebalance your immune system in ways that you are no longer, hopefully, fighting yourself.
Yeah, a lot of the Fertian effects of nicotine actually has something to do with its anti-inflammatory effects, right? And when you trace it down, it's like, why does it do that? And you can see, it's actually this anti-inflammatory part. And we should not underestimate that, because any injury that's resulting from anything, right, will always begin with that inflammation.
Inflammation is key, and we'll have another video on that coming soon.
Yeah. Why, hello, guys.
Hello.
Sorry to interrupt, but we've seen some wild stacks when it comes to nicotine. Nicotine in lion's mane, nicotine in coffee, personal favorite, nicotine in things that probably aren't legal. What's your favorite stack? If you can drop it in the comments below, I promise, or maybe we will, actually try the best ones live here.
All right, Dr. Ted, so we're heading into the final stretch of this nicotine marathon.
Yes.
What do you think is the most important piece of information that we've shared today?
The demonization of nicotine. It falls together with hydrocortisone being demonized by doctors, right? It's just a failure of understanding of what it actually does, and a failure to understand the history, an example of why it was demonized, nicotine was demonized in the first place.
Sure.
When you're using now a pure molecule, you can do many things of it at very low doses and help the body.
I think that's a really, really important point. But we also get it, right? Because most of the time, 30 or 40 years ago, there really weren't any other products like the ones that we have now. It was just cigarettes. And we do know that cigarettes kill people. Like, there's no doubt about it. And
yes, that doctors prefer Camels.
Doctors prefer Camels. Yes, I love those ads, right? And that was a very big thing. Doctors prefer Camels. You should smoke Camels as well. And so, but we know that was all the cigarette companies hiding information so that nobody knew that cancer was happening because of cigarettes. But the key for you and I and this discussion is that we're not talking about cigarettes. We're not talking about vaping products. We're not talking about high doses of nicotine. We're talking about pure synthetic, so non-tobacco derived nicotine as being your safest and most precise that you can use at very low doses and see really amazing things in cognitive
memory, focus, attention, verbal fluidity, and more. And this is something that we use both from Blue Cannatine, but also as a replacement product as well. Sometimes it's a gum, sometimes it's spray. You mix it up. All right. Well, thanks so much, everybody, for listening to this episode of Don't Look Up. We read every comment, so keep them coming, all right? Next up, we're tackling coffee tolerance hacks. Thank you for watching.